Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. Today I'm going to teach you this very easy technique for poetry comparisons. I've called it the FOSSE Way. Those of you who live near it will realise this is actually the longest and oldest Roman road in the country. But this mnemonic is going to help you to write about the form of the poems, the opening of each poems, SOAPAIMS, which stands for simile, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, adjectives, imagery, metaphor, and the senses. You may have been taught other ways of looking at language techniques. Basically, that just means language techniques, okay? But it's just a handy way to remember it. The structure of the poem and the ending. So if you do that, you will stand an excellent chance of getting the very top marks. You're probably wondering what the difference between form and structure is, and I will show you that. I'm going to show you a full essay, but we're not going to read it all in this video. I'm just going to show you where these parts of the FOSSE Way work. And then the other thing I want you to realise is that the comparison question, it doesn't have to be evenly balanced between both poems. So you can write more about either poem. So let's have a look at a question. So this was a question in one of the past papers. Compare how the poets present the effects of war in War Photographer and one other poem. So War Photographer will be put in front of you in the exam, but you might have prepared, and I would encourage you to do this, a banker for any war question. And my banker here would have been Charge of the Light Brigade. So I know if there's a war question, I'm going to use Charge of the Light Brigade. That means I don't have to write as much about War Photographer as everything I have prepared already about the Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay, well, the first part of FOSSE is the form. And when we're talking about form, we mean what kind of poem is it? Well, that's really difficult to do with the Charge of the Light Brigade and with War Photographer. Neither of them have an obvious form. They're not sonnets, they're not written in iambic pentameter, and so really what we want to do is look at how they use rhyme or don't use rhyme. And here both poems do. So when I'm writing about rhyme, I'm writing about the form. So this is what I'm writing about, War Photographer. Consequently, she chooses to disrupt the pattern of rhyming couplets and a syllable pattern which refuses to settle. Now you'll notice that the second part of FOSSE is the opening, and because I'm in an exam, I want to be efficient with my time. And that's why I write about the opening and the form together in the same paragraph. Yep, so this is all about the opening of the poem, and I've commented on the form straight away. And now I do the same with Charge of the Light Brigade. I move to Tennyson, and again in that paragraph I'm going to write about the form. However, he too disrupts the rhyming form of his poem so that we are unsettled by the blunder of the charge and perhaps even by our entry to the war itself. So you can see I'm always coming back to my structure, the FOSSE Way structure, and I've got to write about form at the beginning. Now in my next video I will show you how to write about the poet's purpose at the beginning. So that's the purpose of the poet here, and this bit is the purpose of the poet here. And you can automatically see that I'm writing more in my Tennyson paragraph than my Duffy, because that's the one that I've prepared for my exam, no matter what the question. Okay, now I go back to the opening of Duffy's poem, and what you'll see is I start in with a quotation as quickly as I can, a priest preparing to intone a mass, and I link that to a language technique from SOAPAIMS. So here the language technique is that it is a simile. Another technique that I'm calling it is an allusion, and I'll talk more about that in a later video. So Duffy begins her poem with a Christian allusion in an ironic simile, as though her war photographer is a priest preparing to intone a mass. And then, as you can see, I've got this long detailed explanation about why that is ironic and what the point of that simile is. I'm not teaching you that now though. I'm teaching you that when you start writing about the opening, you're automatically writing about the structure of the poem. You're saying it begins that way, and you're getting straight into a language feature, which here was the simile. Okay, next I go to my Tennyson poem, Child of the Light Brigade, and I'm going straight in to look at the opening of that poem, and I'm going to write about a language technique. Tennyson also uses Christian allusion. Now what I've done there, I hope you can see, is I've used the same technique that was present in War Photographer. There was a Christian allusion in that one with the priest. There's a Christian allusion here. To reach his audience with a reference all his readers would know and most would have memorized by heart, blah blah blah. So I'm linking the two openings and saying how they're similar or different. This one's quite a sophisticated similarity. But you will also notice, because I have prepared what I've written about Charge of the Light Brigade, I've also managed to include this bit in green, which is an aspect of the structure and form. So, however, death ends the rhyme without rhyming and consequently jars the rhythm of the poem. Tennyson's more subtle point might be that the patriotic propaganda of his poem is just a veneer, and that death in this war is both tragic and anti-Christian. So talking about the rhyme is talking about the structure and the form of the poem. Yeah, the form is that it's a rhyming poem, and the structure part is that he chooses to end with this rhyme. So my green here is for both structure and form. They're deeply connected. And what you'll see is I'm using it automatically in my discussion of each part. Right, next I want to write about some language features, because that was the S of FOSSE. So I'm just going to pick a language feature that comes to me as I look through the poems. I go back to Duffy. Duffy drums home her political point with an alliterative list. So alliteration is the language feature of foreign conflicts which took place at a precise time, the 1970s, Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh. But this gives me an advantage because I can now talk about the structure of the poem. Significantly, she begins with a British war, that's the one in Belfast, against Catholics, and then each foreign war becomes greater in scale. And I go on to explain why that is. So I'm making a structure point even when I'm writing about my language features. And so on down here. She therefore blames us, the reader. Her reference to Belfast blames our government, and its consequent support of American wars is blamed with Phnom Penh. That's why she ends it with Phnom Penh here. So you can see that when I'm writing about the language feature, I'm also trying to think about the structure of the poem and make a comment there. Next, I go back to Tennyson and Charge of the Light Brigade, and remember, because I've prepared this one before I go into the exam, this point on Tennyson is going to be much longer. You can see that my paragraphs are longer here, and that's going to get me more marks because I've prepared in advance what I want to say about the language features and the form and structure. I'm not going to read all this to you because I'm just making the point that you can score these marks by following my structure. So here the language technique is anaphora. If you don't know what anaphora is, it's repeating something at the beginning of each line. So cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them. That is anaphora, the repetition of cannon at the beginning of each line. Then I'm going to talk about the structure of the answer and why the cannon is at the beginning of each line, and that's why this is green. The other bit of structure I talk about is the absence of the word the. So we would expect cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, and I talk about why that isn't there. And then I have another structural point where I talked about dactyls. I'm not expecting you to know this. Tune into my later video when I teach you the Charge of the Light Brigade. But anyway, there's a dactylic rhythm, which is again an aspect of form. The rhythm is the form, remember, and I'm scoring marks again even though this is in my paragraph about language features. Then finally, I write about the endings of both poems, and that's going to force me to have a conclusion, and it also forces me to give the author's point of view. So here, both poems end with a focus on the future. Duffy ends accusing the readers, so this is her point of view. You can find out what she's accusing them of. And then we go to Tennyson, and again, because I've prepared my this part of the essay in advance at home, knowing that if it's a war poem, I'm going to write about Charles of the Light Brigade. This is longer. So at the ending, I look at the very ending of the poem, and I then look in the final analysis at his purpose again. But you'll see by the fact that it's green that I'm also writing about the structure. It is the final line. And I'm writing about the form. It is a half rhyme. So what you've got here is a structure that always gets you into the top band. Let's go back to the FOSSE Way and remind ourselves of why that works. So in the top band, you must write about form and structure. And consequently, if I put this at the beginning, which it is, the beginning of FOSSE Way, this forces the examiner to think I've got to give this candidate high marks because she or he is already writing about the form. Remember, when I'm writing about the opening, I'm also thinking about including aspects of the form or aspects of the structure. That's what all the green was about. When I'm writing about SOAPAIMS, the language features, I'm still trying to include things about the structure or the form. And similarly, when I wrote about the ending, I'm still including structure and form. Why do I keep banging on about structure and form? Because, as I said at the beginning, that is what's in the mark scheme for the top grades. And that is what other students won't be doing. Most students will be concentrating on this bit in the middle, talking about the similes, talking about the alliteration, finding some personification if it's there, writing about the metaphors. Okay, they'll be spotting language features. And that is actually not what's going to get you the top marks. The top marks, as I've stressed, is writing about the structure, writing about the form. And the other lesson that I've taught you in this video is how the comparisons don't have to be equal. So I hope you've learned from that. Why not subscribe to get my next video, which will show you another way to get the very top grades. Thank you very much.